Panting up the mountains, chugging through the vales, go the gallant little railway lines of Wales. The firebox glows, the pistons gleam, the engines puffing celestial steam. Take your ticket as the whistle calls up the Vale of Rheidol to the waterfalls. For the land of my fathers looks twice as fine when you see it from a carriage on a railway line. Ah, the great little trains of Wales. They've all had a new lease of life. The tourists rush to ride in them. You daren't boast that you visited Wales if you haven't travelled on the marvellously engineered, narrow-gauge delights that have the gift of twisting you into the heart of the mountains. So I gladly took a ticket for the Vale of Rheidol Railway. Now, this is the line that wriggles and puffs its way up from Aberystwyth on the coast of Cardigan Bay in mid-Wales, through the valley of the Rheidol to the thrilling waterfalls of Devil's Bridge on the high hills of the Plinlimmon Range. Now, the starting point is Aberystwyth. One of the councillors described it to me with pride as the Sorrento of Cardiganshire. Well, on a warm summer day, I can almost believe it, with that elegant curve of the hotels and boarding houses around the bay and the little pier which has given up its early ambitions, and the pseudo-Gothic glories of the University College, and the castle ruins looking pensively out to sea. Now, the starting point of our little railway is Aberystwyth Station. It starts alongside its big brother of British Rail, and the station was built in the style of a pavilion left over from the British Empire exhibition of 1924. The Vale of Rheidol Railway is still controlled by British Rail. It's the only one of the little trains of Wales that they do. Oh, it's had its ups and downs in the past, but now it's at the peak of its popularity, and above all, with youngsters. Well, all these lads were brought up in the automobile age. Until now, they'd never seen a steam train except on old films and television. Never had the pleasure of watching the firemen stoke up, or the privilege of actually chatting with the driver in a rich aura of escaping steam. But this line is not operated as an antique survival. It's run with efficiency. Trains go out bang on time. The first move out of Aberystwyth Station, the main line to our right and the lovely little line to our left which we are on, and I'm surrounded by a delightful collection of visitors
from Norfolk, all the girls, and a rich smell of chocolate biscuits. This is the right way to go up the Rheidol, I reckon.
Out to the station yard, and past the sidings with all the purposeful complexities of a station that's still at work. Onto the first section. This runs along the flatlands beside the river Rheidol. We're still in the outskirts of Aberystwyth, and with Big Brother from BR still alongside. But the train is now approaching a notable place in Welsh history. It's become a suburb of Aberystwyth, Llanbadarn. And just beyond this level crossing lies one of the great churches of Wales. And all Welsh-speaking Welshmen will remember it from the brilliant and witty poem by Wales's greatest medieval poet, Dafydd ap Gwilym. He describes how he attended church here at Llanbadarn, but he found his eyes straying from the service onto the beauties of the local ladies, in the same spirit described in that Burns-like Scottish ballad, "Sitting in the kirk on Sunday, many a handsome lass I see, sitting sober by her daddy, but winking o'er the pews at me." The line itself is over 70 years old, and the original Vale of Rheidol Railway was the victim of a series of successful swallowings. First by the Cambrian, then the Cambrian was gulped by the GWR, and finally the whole lot slid down the throat of British Rail.
Now we are running over the flat river bottom of the Rheidol. It's only about 90 feet above sea level, almost level to the actual mouth of the Rheidol at Aberystwyth. But not very far from here, we're going to start to climb right up to 690 feet.
The first stop is Capel Bangor, about 5 miles from Aberystwyth. The whole line is just over 12 miles long. Some wit, listening to the engines puffing away, declared that it was 12 miles of mechanized asthma. Well, that's not fair. The engines are fine and sturdy, with evocative names of Welsh heroes like Owain Glyndŵr and Llywelyn. Now, these two were built in 1923 from the original drawings of the first locomotives used in 1903. Well, railway enthusiasts and experts will not need me to tell them that they have outside frames and cylinders and outside Valshirt's valve gear. The climb begins. Our first glimpse of the hills closing in on the valley. Well, there's still rich farmlands in the valley bottoms, but the hills have lucrative lead mines, and in the old days that made a lot of money in the first years for the original Vale of Rheidol Railway. But in those days, it wasn't, as it is today, a purely passenger line. The station at Aberystwyth, 200 feet above sea level. And the train has already done quite a bit of serious climbing. Aberystwyth used to be a bit of a show place in the old days. Lovely gardens, all the rest of it. And of course the ore from the lead mines loaded on from across the valley. Now it's the main point where the engines have to take on water. And they'll need it. For ahead lies the hardest part of the climb, a rise of 480 feet in just over 4 miles. So I seize the chance, which everybody longs to do, to transfer myself to the engine and take a ride.
I'm shouting over the noise of the engine, and we're leaving Aberystwyth station now, and we are really getting to grips of the climb.
Indeed we were. The hills were now so close you felt you could lean out and touch them. The gallant engine puffed away, waving white banners of steam among the trees. And the bends. Remember the old picture postcards that showed the typical Welsh railway curves with the guard in the last carriage leading out to shake hands with the driver? It could be almost true here.
What are you doing, man?
And in the first opening days of the line, people felt that the train was balancing dangerously near the precipices. One high official with a wooden leg declared that he'd walk back to Aberystwyth rather than face the return journey. And he needn't have worried. Although the gauge is just under 2 feet, the permanent way has ample room either side. You're now high up over the winding Rheidol River, and you look down on the lake and the new power station far below. The train is running on a sort of ledge that fits into the mountain. The lake, well, the water is brought down through tunnels from a great dam high up on the fastness of Plinlimmon. And the design of the power station is good, strong. It rightly won a prize, and it seems to fit into the landscape. You know, looking down on this remote valley from a carriage filled with city holidaymakers, you can't help thinking what a contrast they all are to the slow, mysterious, tranquil life that they must be living down in the valley bottom, right out of the world. That little whitewashed cottage far down underneath, who lives there, you ask yourself? And we sent the camera down and found out. A charming old lady with her cat Spitfire. The original Spitfire was born in the war, named after the Battle of Britain, and every cat in Rheidol has been a Spitfire ever since, but a gentle, purring Spitfire, though.
Der hinten, den doet den ook. Den doet die ook.
And that new lake, glittering under the stern hills, when there's a little farm beside it where 3 brothers live together. They're all bachelors, Welsh-speaking, scorning the dress of the modern world. They wear good, rough Welsh tweed coats, just like their fathers before them. You know, you don't worry much about modern fashion in the depths of Rheidol. And as they walk, the brothers discuss inflation. Oh, yes, it hit Rheidol, all right, as well as Birmingham. They talk of the price of tobacco. It's risen astronomically in Rheidol. Up puffs the train, and you look down again into the depths of the Cwm. And you see a curiosity in front of a neat farmhouse, the next one up the valley. Of all things, a monkey puzzle tree, here in the wild heart of a valley in Plinlimmon. Now, who could have planted such a strange exotic? Well, they were fashionable over 100 years ago, imported from South America, the Chilean pine. Or if you want its Latin name, it's Araucaria aruncana. An excellent wind resistor, they say. Well, maybe the wife of the lead mines manager felt it was the right thing to plant, a symbol of social superiority. The Rheidol tumbles over the falls in front of the door. And today, the monkey puzzle might remain, but the mine is gone. The mine buildings are gaunt and empty and broken. At one time, Cardigan lead mines were as important as any in the world, and the ore came soaring up to the train across the valley on a daring ropeway. Now all that's left of this leaden El Dorado are the spoil heaps. Rheidol Falls Station, at 380 feet above sea level. The train is still climbing, and it's now only 3 miles to the terminus. All exciting. A great plunge on one side, a steep rock wall on the other. And the track on which the engine runs here, And again, the enthusiast will want to know all those little details that add to the fascination of these little lines. The track is interesting. 9 miles were relayed in 1923 with sleeper spacing reduced to 2 feet 6 inches. And between 1952 and 1955, a further 2¼ miles were relayed with 70-pound rails from standard gauge Aberystwyth branch. Well, the ordinary passenger, I'm sure, wouldn't know what a gauge is. He's delighting in the scenery and craning his neck to see that great landmark made by the spoil banks of the old lead mine, the Stag. The last stretch, the gradient is almost continuous, 1 in 50, and that's pretty steep for a railway, however cunningly it's engineered. And looking down on the train from above, it looked exactly like that Hornby train set that was the pride of my life as a Christmas present over 50 years ago. And curves galore. And from the engine, I saluted the most spectacular of them.
And now, the horseshoe bend!
This really is an exciting way into the hills. You're now nearly 500 feet above the level of the racing river far below. And the hillsides are buried in trees, so that you catch a glimpse of the valley floor in between the branches. And that adds to the excitement. Sometimes you feel the driver's looking out to see if the train is still on the rails. I don't think this is fanciful, but at this point on the line, I was reminded of that remarkable railway that twists itself into knots to get up to Darjeeling on the foothills of the Himalayas. Well, a drop feels the same at 500 or 5,000 feet if you're in the swaying, driving cab of an engine puffing along a rock wall on only a 2-foot wide rail track. The line straightens itself out after the horseshoe bend. Relatively speaking, of course, for there isn't a straight 100 yards in the whole of this section. And there, close at hand, are the outlying hills of Plinlimmon, slashed by the gorge that holds the Devil's Bridge. The last quarter of a mile. The gallant little engine, still game, panting its way through the woods, waving its white banner of triumphant steel. Under the footbridge and into the terminus. Thousands of people must have known this little station over 600 feet up in the hills and surrounded in summer with the colour of the massed rhododendrons. The terminus has been extensively remodelled of recent years. The goods yard has gone, of course, for the Vale of Rheidol is now exclusively a passenger line. No one loads lead ore here anymore. Farmers no longer send their sheep down to market by it. But as the little engine wheezes gently to a stop, you feel like walking up to it and patting it on the boiler and saying, "Well done, little un." Well, for over 70 years, people have been pouring out of the trains here. And the tourists of today walk along the same platform as the excited passengers of the early years of the railway, of the territorials who used the lines in the far-off days before World War I to camp on Plinlimmon, and the great crowds that once came up on the train to attend the evangelical meetings of Gypsy Smith in 1905, and sang hymns continuously the whole 12 miles up from Aberystwyth. The terminus is not precisely at the Devil's Bridge itself. It's on the shelf of the steep valley that leads up to it, and you can see how the river, rejuvenated by a huge uplift of the land 1,000,000 years ago, cut down once again into its old, gently sloping valley to make a new and spectacular gorge. Passengers walk along the road and they come out onto the terrace before the Havard Hotel, and they get a stunning view down into the woody depths. The Devil's Bridge has now been a tourist attraction for 200 years. There are now 3 bridges, and the story about the lowest, well, they say that one day old Megan was lamenting that her favourite cow Blodwen had mysteriously got across the gorge. "I'd give anything to get her back," she sighed. A whiff of brimstone and a polite gentleman with a black beard was standing beside her. "I'll take the first living thing to cross the bridge I can build for you." "Done," said Megan. Hey presto, the bridge was built, but cunning Megan took a round loaf out of her bag, tumbled it over the bridge, and a little dog ran after it. "You're welcome to him, sir," smiled Megan, and the devil disappeared in a fury of disappointment and brimstone, leaving the first Devil's Bridge behind. And still today, the water of the Mynach tumbles furiously 500 feet to join the Rheidol far below. There's a path around the falls, and that can be pretty spectacular too. And wisely, there's a notice that says, if you're old and infirm, don't proceed beyond this point. The agile, however, can troop down this sort of Jacob's ladder, which is certainly every bit as steep as it looks. Then you look out beyond the path to the top end of the valley we've been following, to where the Rheidol comes down from the wilds of Plinlimmon. And I remember one of the first tourists who came striding down this way and declared that this bit of Wales was every bit as exciting as Switzerland. It was George Borrow, that formidable walker, who thought nothing of tramping his 25 miles over the top of the Plinlimmon and the mountains to stay at the hotel that now bears his name at Pont Erwyd. And what wonderful, lonely country lies beyond. The little railway can open it up for you. The great Nantemouch Reservoir, with its concrete wall of almost Roman strength and dignity. And beyond, the water lies gleaming amid the lost green hills. And away in the background, brooding over the wilderness, the 2,400-foot summit of ancient Plinlimmon. And from it all, the little train returns, with its engine not turned around, but packed to front, as it were, puffing easily and contentedly down the long 12 miles, about which we've climbed, back down the Vale of Rheidol to Aberystwyth. What could you wish for a happier excursion among the secret hills of Wales? Panting up the mountains, chugging through the vales, go the gallant little railway lines of Wales. The firebox glows, the pistons gleam, the engines puffing celestial steam. Take your ticket as the whistle calls up the Vale of Rheidol to the waterfalls. For the land of my fathers looks twice as fine when you see it from a carriage on a railway line.